Hey guys, welcome back to Shredcraft RC. I'm Cam, and today we're taking a look at this kind of prototype idea, or some ideas I'm sharing of this prototype chassis design that I've come up with. So I hope in the last video you guys liked it, but I did the build on the shocks here, and then I showed how much chassis roll I built into this, and I just kind of wanted to maybe explain some of the reasoning because I didn't do a lot of explaining in the last video. So what I did here was I added curved ball ends to move the bottom of the shock in and closer. I'm just going to give this arm a better lever ratio in the shock, along with spacing this out where the shock mounts on the top shock tower. And then I also raised the shock tower by an additional 2 millimeters, which is typically double what the kit spacer they sell I think is only a 2 mil spacer. So essentially a 4 mil spacer in the shock tower. This I believe is a 6 mil spacer on the top, and then the 45-degree Yokomo lower shock ball end. And then what I did here on the knuckle, I put a 15 mil, or this might be like a 12 mil shim on the top of the knuckle, along with another little spacer just so I could clear the edge of the tire, and it just barely clears there. So I'm going to run that and see, but essentially I wanted to make that roll a lot more. So it is super supple and plush, and there's a lot of camber gain with the arms being that high. The other thing I did that was maybe not traditional, but I flipped the upper arm mount. Basically, this is just stock parts, but I flipped it 180 degrees. It bolted right back in. Just have to flip your arms side to side to match. But yeah, that raised this upper arm mount pretty significantly. So I think that's going to be interesting front geometry there, and I'm interested to see how that drives. I also have this rear battery holder. This is just a template idea so I can test a battery up there. And then these are 65 millimeter standoffs, I believe. And then I have the ESC mounted below. And then on the rear, I believe this is 5 mil, maybe 6 mil spacing with the Yokomo big bore mount there. And then the other thing I did was I added Yokomo lower arms in the rear here. And those are just standard YD2S lower arms. And the reason for doing that is they're just slightly longer than the RDX arms. And having a longer arm is going to let this roll easier, essentially. I still have the stock camber arms. It's also still stock toe arms in the front, so trying to utilize as many stock parts as possible. And then I have a chassis coming that I've designed. It's a prototype, so not a production model yet, but to make sure all of this bolts on together. And then a special body that I'm sure some of you have seen on Instagram, but the new body will be ready and finished just in time for the Matsuri. So hopefully we have a cool new chassis to show and test out this high mount battery. But if you can tell, this thing just rocks and rolls. So can't wait to see what that looks like on track. Alright, so I got a battery in the car and I got the body on the car, and I just kind of wanted to demonstrate the body roll here and show you how much roll this chassis has. So it's pretty significant compared to my other car. There's a lot of droop. Oops. There's a lot of droop, so the body's going to move a lot. And then I also mounted the body higher than I would have mounted, say, my other car. So you can just kind of tell this is going to be a little more exaggerated of a body roll than a car made with a little shorter shocks, or your standard RC drift kind of setup. So I think I'm going to take this to the track and see how it does, get some testing in on it. But before then, we're going to have to go ahead and tune everything because this is all a fresh setup. So if I need to make turnbuckles, I kind of wanted to leave it plastic links, but I can make some turnbuckles for it and then get it aligned, or put it on the rack now, see what it's at, and try to adjust with some shims in the plastic arms and see where we can get. But overall, the movement feels good. You can only judge so much just by moving it on the bench. You kind of got to take it to the track and drive it. Got all the electronics set up. This one's now on my 10PX, so I can have both my cars on the Futaba. And yeah, I'll be able to drive the cars back to back, which will be fun to compare them. So I'm going to go ahead, get the body off, and then dive into some tuning here, take a closer look at things, and I'll show you guys as I go. Here I got the car on the rack, just kind of go over what I did and why I did it. So on the rear camber arms, I did leave them the stock plastic lengths. I moved the inside out one hole on the lower row, just in one hole, and then up here on the knuckle, it's in the top outside hole on both sides. And then with those Yokomo lower arms and stock hubs, that puts me right about -3 degrees on each wheel, which is typically what I run all my cars at. And because of that camber progression I have on those camber arms, it's going to gain quite a bit of camber under squat, but under roll, the lead wheel is going to have less camber gain, I guess, as it leans in. So it'll roll to about 0, which will, as the car's drifting and you're pitched to that outside wheel, it's going to roll that wheel to 0. Typically I see people when they run 0 degrees of static rear toe and they're drifting, that wheel's going to roll to the positive side, and then you're going to lose traction. So typically I like to run my rear camber, so after a fresh set of tires, run it a few laps and see what the contact patch is. Typically I like to run the inside half of the tire. So it'll roll all the way to 0 and then come back here to -3. So you can just kind of see how it rolls. And I was sitting there staring at it for a while. I did change the shocks and got a piece of all thread to correctly mount those rear posts. I just didn't have it at the time. Alright, so here on the front, I don't know if you can tell or not, but I changed the spacing on the front shock. I took out that big 6mm and I went back to a 2mm just because of the offset of the big bore caps. Seemed to be enough to keep the shock pretty vertical along with those 45-degree rear lowers there. And then on the front knuckle here, I actually put a 6mm shim under this 12mm. And that was able to get the arm up and out of the way of the tire, maybe giving it another millimeter of clearance. On this top arm I went with a turnbuckle, took out the plastic shim, and on the bottom I went with a 2mm shim there on the arm, and that was to push it out just a little more to give me a little more camber. Right now it's at this ride height, my focus is going crazy. Alright, I had to fix the focus there. The camera's going crazy. The camber I'm at now with that shim set up on those upper arms is sitting right about 11, but the reason it's so high is because, watch this, with how much travel I've set this car up for, the amount of toe out that this thing can get when it squats back and rolls back is pretty insane. Now, of course the car will never go that high, but even looking at what it might do under its own weight and power is pretty significant. So then the car it does have a lot of bump steer, but I don't think the car's going to move that much. I think it's to over exaggerate the look of having body roll, and this is all just testing, so I'm not saying this works yet. We need to take this car out and go film with it and get some slow-mo shots of it rolling and seeing how it works. So that's just a brief basic overview of what I've done to the front end of the ReveD RDX. Alright, so I got the Sky RC corner weight system here. I'll try to avoid that glare. I'm going to throw the car on the scales here and see what it does. Alright, so it's actually fairly light, 1142, 66 rear, 34 front. Having not had it on the scales yet and thrown it on, I think that's pretty good. Could throw the body on really quick and see what that looks like too. So with the body and a battery. 13, 15, still 66 rear, 34 front. So, not terrible. Crossweight's a little off, but that can all be fine-tuned with some shock tuning, but pretty happy with that. So I think the next thing I need to do is drive this thing and get some slow-mo shots. So that'll be coming up.